He became emperor before he understood what power was. At an age when most boys are still learning who they are, he ruled the greatest empire on earth. 4 years later, his name would be erased, his statues smashed, his memory hunted down, and his body discarded like garbage. Between those two moments lies one of the darkest psychological tragedies in history. This is the story of Emperor Elagabalus. Before Rome ever spoke his name, he was already worshipped. He was born in the eastern edge of the empire, in a land of burning sun, incense, ritual, and ancient gods. From his earliest years, he was not treated as a child. He was treated as something sacred, something untouchable, something divine. His family served a powerful sun deity known as Elagabal. This god was not worshipped through quiet prayer or gentle devotion. His cult was built on spectacle, emotion, music, ecstatic ritual, and overwhelming sensory experience. The boy who would become Elagabalus was raised at the center of this world. Instead of games, he learned ceremony. Instead of friendship, he learned reverence. Instead of affection, he learned awe. Crowds bowed before him. Priests knelt at his feet. Soldiers lowered their eyes. He stood draped in silk and gold, surrounded by smoke and chanting, as thousands watched in silence, convinced they were in the presence of a living symbol of divine power. From the beginning, reality was blurred. He did not grow up understanding himself as human. He grew up understanding himself as holy. This shaped everything. His sense of identity never fully formed. His emotions were filtered through ritual. His desires were wrapped in symbolism. His will was reinforced by obedience. He was never told no. He was never restrained. He was never corrected. And most dangerously, he was never allowed to be ordinary. Psychologically, this kind of upbringing is devastating. A child raised as divine does not develop limits. A child worshipped does not learn empathy. A child surrounded by ritual instead of affection does not learn emotional safety. By adolescence, the line between who he was and who he was supposed to represent had completely vanished. He was no longer just a boy. He was an icon. And icons do not know how to be human. When the Roman Empire entered another period of violent instability, his family saw opportunity. The empire was exhausted. Emperors were being murdered, replaced, betrayed, and overthrown at terrifying speed. The legions were restless. Loyalty could be bought. Power was temporary. And into this chaos stepped a brilliant and ruthless woman, his grandmother. She understood something essential about Roman politics. Soldiers did not fight for law, tradition, or the Senate. They fought for symbols, for memory, for bloodlines, for legends. So she created one. She spread a carefully crafted story. The teenage priest of the sun god was not merely a holy figure. He was the hidden son of the former emperor Caracalla, a ruler still worshipped by many in the army. It was a lie, but it was a powerful one. Gold reinforced it, promises sealed it, and blades enforced it. Within weeks, the reigning emperor was assassinated. The Eastern legions declared loyalty to the 14-year-old priest, and the Roman world watched in disbelief.
As a child, shaped by ritual, isolation, and divine worship, became emperor. The journey to Rome was a procession of shock. Cities bowed, crowds gathered, officials trembled. But when he finally entered the capital, the reaction was not celebration. It was silence. Rome had seen conquerors, warriors, generals, strategists. It had never seen anything like this. The new emperor wore flowing robes instead of armor. His movements were theatrical, almost ceremonial. His appearance was deliberate, stylized, distant from Roman tradition. He did not hide his origins, he displayed them. At the heart of Rome's sacred spaces, he installed the holy stone of his Eastern god, a black meteorite believed to embody divine presence. He declared this god supreme above Jupiter, Mars, and all Roman deities. To conservative Romans, this was more than blasphemy. It was cultural annihilation. Rome had conquered the world, but it had never surrendered its identity. Now, a teenager from the desert was telling them their gods were obsolete. From the beginning, his reign was defined by collision. East against West, mysticism against discipline, emotion against order, impulse against restraint. And at the center of it all stood a psychologically fragile adolescent with absolute authority. Modern historians increasingly believe that Elagabalus was not simply corrupt or immoral. He was profoundly destabilized. His childhood had erased boundaries. His upbringing had dismantled identity. His elevation to emperor removed the last remaining limits. He lived inside a world where desire was sacred, obedience was automatic, and consequence did not exist. Power did not change him. Power unleashed him. Inside the palace, his court became a reflection of his inner world, lavish, disorienting, theatrical, and increasingly unpredictable. Public ceremonies turned into elaborate performances. Religious rituals merged with imperial spectacle. Political decisions blurred into personal impulse. Rome no longer felt governed, it felt possessed. Elagabalus delighted in defying Roman expectations. He rejected traditional roles, dismissed social hierarchies, and openly challenged the moral codes that had structured Roman life for centuries. To some, he represented liberation. To most, he embodied catastrophe. His personal relationships became political statements. His choices deliberately violated tradition. His identity itself became a provocation. Each public appearance widened the gulf between emperor and empire. Mockery spread, rumors multiplied, fear followed. Inside the palace, extravagance escalated. Feasts grew more elaborate, ceremonies more intense, luxury more suffocating. But beneath the surface, something darker was unfolding. Elagabalus was becoming isolated. Surrounded by courtiers who flattered, manipulated, and feared him, he lost any remaining sense of emotional grounding. Trust vanished. Paranoia took root. Every glance felt like judgment. Every whisper sounded like betrayal. The palace transformed from sanctuary to trap. He ruled through spectacle, but also through unpredictability. No one knew what mood awaited them. No one knew whether favor or ruin stood behind the next curtain. His emotional world swung violently between exultation and despair. Moments of divine self-confidence collapsed into profound insecurity. He was worshipped, yet deeply alone. Feared, yet desperately seeking validation. powerful yet internally fragile. Rome watched this transformation with mounting horror. What had begun as cultural shock now felt like existential threat. The Senate despised him, the elites ridiculed him, the army grew restless, and beneath the marble halls, conspiracy quietly formed. Elagabalus sensed it. He felt the empire slipping through his fingers. In desperation, he attempted to stabilize his rule by naming his young cousin Alexander as heir. He believed he could control him, shape him, use him. Instead, he created his replacement. Alexander embodied everything Rome longed for: stability, restraint, tradition, discipline.
The people adored him. The Senate rallied around him. The soldiers trusted him. Suddenly, the empire had a choice, and Elagabalus was no longer inevitable. The shift was subtle at first: less applause, fewer smiles, more guarded conversations, then whispers, then silence, then fear. Elagabalus reacted the only way he knew how, with emotional volatility, suspicion, and escalating attempts to assert dominance. But the more he struggled, the more isolated he became. Power began slipping away, and in its place grew desperation. Power was slipping away, and Elagabalus could feel it. For the first time in his life, obedience was no longer automatic. Fear no longer guaranteed loyalty. Worship no longer ensured devotion. Every corridor whispered betrayal. Every smile looked rehearsed. Every silence sounded like a threat. The palace that once felt like a sanctuary of divine authority now felt like a cage. His paranoia deepened. He began seeing enemies everywhere, in senators, servants, generals, even in members of his own family. Those who had once protected him now whispered behind closed doors. Those who had once knelt now calculated. The fragile psychological structure that had sustained him since childhood began to collapse. His emotions swung violently between grandiosity and terror. One moment he was a god reshaping reality, the next a frightened adolescent clinging desperately to power. He became unpredictable, erratic, volatile. Decisions were no longer strategic, they were impulsive, emotional, and often cruel. Punishments became spectacles, rewards became traps. No one could predict his reactions. And in that uncertainty, fear ruled. Yet fear could no longer hold the empire together. The Senate openly despised him. The aristocracy ridiculed him in private. The army, the true source of imperial power, was losing patience. Rome had endured cruel emperors before, but never one who seemed so alien, so disconnected, so fundamentally incompatible with Roman identity. The contrast between Elagabalus and his cousin Alexander grew sharper every day. Where Elagabalus embodied excess, Alexander represented restraint. Where Elagabalus embodied chaos, Alexander promised order. Where Elagabalus shocked, Alexander reassured. Slowly, almost invisibly, loyalty shifted. Elagabalus noticed the change. The applause was quieter, the crowds thinner, the reverence colder. And for the first time, doubt pierced his certainty. He responded not with reform, but with desperation.
He attempted to discredit Alexander, to isolate him, to remove him, but each act of aggression only strengthened Alexander's popularity. Each display of paranoia only confirmed Rome's fears. Elagabalus found himself trapped inside a role he could no longer control. The god was becoming a liability. The emperor was becoming expendable. Inside the palace, tension thickened like smoke. Conspiracies formed in whispered conversations and exchanged glances. The Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers sworn to protect the emperor, began to shift allegiance. Their loyalty had always been conditional. Now it was vanishing. Elagabalus felt it in the air. Something was coming. He tightened security, increased surveillance, moved constantly, slept poorly, ate little. Trust evaporated. Isolation deepened. Psychologically, he was unraveling. The child who had been worshipped, exalted, and adored now stood alone against a civilization that wanted him erased. And then, one morning, it happened. The guards entered his chambers, not with ceremony, not with respect, but with cold resolve. They seized him. They seized his mother, dragged them through the corridors where he had once ruled as a living god. Servants turned away, courtiers hid, no one intervened. The palace doors opened, and the streets of Rome swallowed him. The crowd gathered quickly. Years of humiliation, years of outrage, years of suppressed fury erupted at once. The emperor who had dared to mock their gods, their traditions, their identity, now stood powerless before them. He screamed, he pleaded, he cursed, but the empire had already passed judgment. His reign ended not with dignity, not with ceremony, not with mercy. It ended in chaos, in rage, in obliteration. When it was over, there was no triumph, only silence, only exhaustion, only the unsettling realization of what Rome had just done to one of its own. The Senate acted swiftly. His name was condemned, his statues shattered, his images destroyed, his records erased. It was decreed that he never existed. Damnatio memoriae. The annihilation of memory. Rome wanted him gone, not just from power, but from history itself. Yet history refused. Because Elagabalus is not merely a scandal, he is a warning. A 14-year-old boy, shaped by ritual, isolation, and worship, was handed infinite power. Not guided, not protected, not restrained, but unleashed. What followed was not simply moral collapse, it was psychological implosion. He was not born monstrous, he was manufactured. By devotion without boundaries, by authority without restraint, by a world that turned a child into a god before he learned how to be human. His life forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Absolute power does not corrupt slowly, it destroys instantly, especially when placed into fragile hands. Elagabalus ruled for only 4 years, but in those 4 years he exposed the terrifying consequences of unlimited authority, unchecked identity, and political worship. His story is not one of decadence alone. It is a tragedy. A boy raised as divine, a teenager crowned as emperor, a human being crushed underneath the impossible weight of absolute power. And in the end, Rome did not just execute an emperor, It erased a broken child who never had a chance to become anything else.